Hello and welcome, Bruce Fulton here. This is going to be a quick run through of the current version of Ubuntu long-term support, version 18.04. We're going to run through the LAMP installation. That's Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP. That's a popular web hosting environment that many of you are going to want to play around with. I'm going to show you how to install it on VMware Workstation for Windows. Current version is, I think we're up to around 15, maybe 15.5. And this is going to be an environment for you to play around with. A couple of things you're going to need. You're going to need to download the Ubuntu Server 18.04 long-term support ISO. The ISO is an image of a CD. You don't need the CD. We can work directly from a file. Trot on over to ubuntu.com. From there you can go to the download page. Click that. Underneath that, you're going to want to take a look at Ubuntu Server. You'll see the long-term support version. That's 18.04. Generally, every couple of years, they release a long-term support version. Generally, those are 18.04 is the current one that I'm going to show you. The next one will be 20.04. The previous one was 16.04. There's also the current version. If you want to experiment around with that, it should be pretty similar. But I recommend sticking with a long-term support that's supported for, I don't know, 5 years or something or other like that. So it's going to be pretty stable for you. Just go ahead and click that. The download will start. It's a large file depending on your network speed and how busy the servers are. I think it's around 700 megabytes, something or other like that. So that could take a while to install. Save it off to your desktop someplace where you can come back and find it. The next thing you're going to want to install is VMware Workstation. For that, go on over to the VMware site. This is a free trial. It's a moderately pricey product if you want to purchase it. There is a product called VirtualBox. I'm not going to cover that, at least not in this video. That's open source or at least shareware or freeware product that you can try. I've preferred the VMware products. We use those in our classes at the University of Arizona. You can get a free trial. To get to the free trial, once you get to VMware, go to the downloads page. You can go to free product trials and demos. In this video, I'm going to cover Workstation Pro. That's the product for Windows. You can also get Fusion for the Macintosh. For the Mac, I'll cover that in a separate video. Go ahead and download and install Workstation Pro. Those are the two products you need. And I'll cover installing that Ubuntu product on Workstation Pro, and we'll get that going for you. And I'll show you how to install the LAMP environment. Used to be that you could install LAMP directly in the installation of the Ubuntu Server product. That's no longer the case, but it just takes a few short steps once the server is installed to get that going. So let's go ahead and we'll get that started for you. So once you've installed VMware Workstation, and you have downloaded the ISO file, the Ubuntu Server ISO file, you're going to create a new virtual machine. A couple of ways you can do that. You can create a new virtual machine here by clicking on this tab. You can also go File, New Virtual Machine. Either way works exactly the same way. And now I'll run you through the options that I recommend. I recommend going with a typical VMware Workstation virtual machine. There is an advanced option. We don't really need to do that for this particular setup. If you have certain types of disk arrays, for example, if you were installing this in a live situation, some other kinds of situations that you would need to go into a configuration that's a little bit out of the ordinary. You might need to do this, but typical is going to work fine for this process. Click Next. You have a few options here. You can install from an installer disk. We don't need to worry about that. You can do, at this point, name your installer disk, and that's going to start what's called an easy install option, and we don't want to do that because we want to set a few options. So I recommend this for desktop, but not for server. So go ahead and click the I will install the operating system later, and we're going to make a few tweaks before we actually start the installation. Make sure that guest operating system, that Linux, is selected, and in the drop down here, it may drop down below where you can see, but you want to make sure that Ubuntu 64-bit is selected in the version. So make sure that those two boxes are checked, because that does make a little bit of a difference in the install. For virtual machine name, you want to give it something simple. I'd avoid character spaces and things like that. That's going to make a directory and file setup on your host system disk. So I would recommend picking something that is straightforward and simple. So I'm going to pick something like, let's call it Ubuntu 18.04s, something like that. And then you can, it's going to pick a file and directory structure down here. You can change that if you want to. I have mine set up in a certain place, so I'm going to browse here. And once you've got that set up, go ahead and click Next. You can specify a couple of parameters about how this virtual disk is going to be set up. First is the size. It defaults to 20. That's plenty for a system to play around with, unless you know that you're going to need more. If you're going to use it to store a lot of large video files, maybe you want to bump that up a little, but that's usually plenty. You have your choice about how to create those. You can store the virtual disk as a single file. There's some minor performance advantages, but unless you're doing something strange, it's not going to be too much of a performance advantage. I recommend you take the default, which is to split the virtual disk into multiple files. That's going to make it easier to move it to a different computer should you choose, or especially if you think you might want it to move it to a flash drive or something. It's better to have it in multiple files so you don't run into problems with the way that the flash drive is partitioned, but you can make your choice there. So this gives you a chance to look at what the choices you've made so far is. You can't really do anything at this point. You can click Custom Hardware, but we can do that in the next step as well. So I usually just click Finish here. A couple of things we need to change now as the next screen displays before we try to boot up the starting setup. So the first thing we need to do is go ahead and click on the CD DVD because that's where we're going to substitute the CD ISO file that we downloaded from Ubuntu. So go ahead and click that. And then where it says use physical drive, what we're going to do is we're going to select use the ISO image file. And we're going to select that, and we're going to click browse. We're going to browse to wherever it is we downloaded that file and stored it, and then we're going to select the image file that we downloaded. In this case, it's the 1804.3 live server file. We're just going to select that and click open. And we're going to want to make sure that Connect at Power On is selected. Second thing we may want to take a look at is memory. It will pre-select a memory based on the amount of memory you have. It comes up with a recommended and a maximum amount. The recommended amount is probably fine. If you have problems with the installation or problems with the machine running once it's installed, you can increase this a little bit. The recommended amount, as I say, is usually fine. I'm going to bump this up just a little bit just based on my experience with this. I do better with a little bit more based on some of the things I've been doing with it. But you can start out with a recommended amount and see how it works. If you don't have any problems, then you should be good with a recommended amount of memory. That's all we need to do now. Later on, we can come back and change the network adapter from NAT to bridge. That depends on how you're going to be using it. If you want other devices on your home network to be able to access the virtual machine, You're probably going to need to come back and change this from NAT to bridge so other devices can get at it, but that's more than we're going to be covering here in this particular video. So right now the only thing we really need to do is to change the CD to the ISO file that we've downloaded, and then you can think about whether or not you need to bump up that memory a little bit. So we're going to click OK, and then the next thing to do is to go ahead and start the installation by powering on the virtual machine. And it will start the installation process, and it may give you some messages about different things. It may ask you about devices that are attached to your host system, various USB devices, whether or not they're going to be attached to the virtual machine or not. It'll start the installation, and we can look at the first initial boot up process as it gets the CD image going. And you may find that this process has changed quite a bit. If you're familiar with the 1604, the last long-term supported edition, there are a whole new set of prompts here. The first one, of course, is pick your language. Now you find, as with the previous editions, that your cursor here, you need to actually click in the installation window here in order to get to where you can arrow up and down to select your options here. And then to release the cursor, you need to press your Control and Alt key. This is indicated down here once you click in the window. And actually, it's better now about releasing the mouse. They've done some work here with the virtualization, but you may find to release the mouse you have to hit the Control and Alt key. But as I say, click in the window so that you can activate your cursor and selection keys inside the window. Highlight your language and then press Enter when you're done. As far as the keyboard layout, again, you can tab here to go to the various selections if you think you need to change this. So again, your tab key is what navigates. When you've got your correct selections highlighted, tab to the Done option and then press Enter. It will auto-detect your card, your network card. Just check and make sure that's correct. ENS33 is the standard name that it usually gives an Ethernet card, and it will give your IP address that it detects, and then it will default to Done. Usually you don't have to do anything here. If there's a problem or if it doesn't detect something, you'll have to correct your networking before you can proceed. You do need to be connected. For the most part, when you're doing this, it'll attempt to do a system update and security update. When you complete the process, we'll take a look at that in a minute. So assuming that this is correct, you can go ahead and press Done. One case that you might have to make some choices here, if you have multiple network interface cards, you may need to select the one that you want to bind to the virtual machine. But assuming you only have one, then you can go ahead and press Done here. It's almost certain that you won't have a proxy address. If you know that you need one, then you can enter the proxy server that you need to reach to enter the outside world, but that's almost never the case with a home network. So make sure that Done is highlighted and press Enter here. If you need to enter an alternative mirror for Ubuntu, this may be the case if you are residing in a foreign country where there's a mirror that is better for you to access the Ubuntu repositories, but you can usually just leave this where it is and highlight that. You can use the entire disk. You can use the entire disk and set up LVM. For this virtual machine that we're setting up here, I recommend that you don't do that. Just default to use an entire disk and press Enter. For the virtual machine that we're creating, you want to go ahead and default to this dev/SDA local disk. That's the virtual disk that you're creating on your computer. If you were doing a live install on a disk array or a RAID array or something or other like that, you would have other options here, but this is the one that you want, so just go ahead and hit the default. This is just presenting you with the options. This for our virtual machine is going to be fine, so go ahead and click Done and press Enter. Now at this point you actually have to positively make the selection of defaults to know if this were a live system you'd want to think about this, but what you're going to want to do is press the Tab key to get to continue and then press Enter, and it goes ahead and initializes that virtual disk. At this point you can key in the primary user's name and the server name, and then a username and a password. So I'm going to make this simple, and I recommend you do the same. This is not going to be a secure environment. This is something for you to play around with. So I'm going to key in name user1, and I'm going to give the server name the same name I gave the directory. So we're going to call this Ubuntu 1804. S for server. I'm going to username is going to be user1, and I just do password. If you pick something else, write it down. If you pick something and then forget it, it creates kind of a mess. So whatever you pick, make it simple. And then tab again down to Done. For this, you almost certainly want to install OpenSSH Server, and to select it, you press the space bar to put an X here. If you just go through this too quickly and you press the Tab key and you go to Done, it's not going to get installed. You can install it later. This is not an unrecoverable mistake. OpenSSH Server will allow you to use file transfer protocols to get stuff from your host machine to the virtual machine. So there's really no reason not to select this. You want this installed almost certainly. If you don't check the box, but I'm just saying you almost certainly want this installed. When the X is there, and again to repeat, you press the space bar. You can toggle it off with the space bar too, but space bar toggles it on. Then you can press the Tab key. You probably won't import an SSH identity if you have a GitHub account and you're configuring this virtual machine to transfer files back and forth with your GitHub or Launchpad account, then you'll already know about this and you'll have SSH keys that you want to import. But and then you can say yes, and then you can configure this, but probably you're not going to be doing this with this virtual machine. If you do, fine, go ahead, and then hit Tab once more to get to Done, and then you can press Enter. There's the option here, which is new since 1604, to import a bunch of server environments, and if you know about these, then you can arrow up and down and press the space bar to select one or more of these. And so one option you might pick would be Postgres SQL. That's an alternative to MySQL. That would be a popular one. If you want to experiment with Amazon Web Services, you could do that. So if you know about one of these and want to install it, arrow up or down, press the space bar. Otherwise, if you don't want to install any of these, press the Tab key and you're done. Now, it's going to start installing a bunch of things, and then it's going to run an update. And this gets a little bit confusing because it's not entirely clear from the prompts when this is done. So this is going to take a while. If you want to watch what's going on, you can hit the Tab key and you can select View Full Log and then press Enter to view the full log. And that will sort of show you what it's doing, although it's a little bit confusing because there isn't really a progress bar. And then if you want to close that again, you can press the Tab key to select Close, press Enter, and you're back to this sort of spinning stick mode. So I'm going to pause the video here actually and let it spin. And this will take, depending on your system, it could take 15 minutes or so. I'll give you a report on that, and I'll come back when we get to the next point when you have to do something. Okay, now there's a point here where you'll note that it says the installation is complete. And you change your options down here from close and view full log to view full log and cancel, update, and reboot. And at this point, if you want to, you'll notice that it says it's downloading and installing security updates. If you want to, you can go ahead and cancel and reboot the system at this point. My recommendation is to go ahead and let it download and install the security updates. And again, it's a little bit difficult to tell when that's complete. You can, let me go ahead and recapture the system. You can go ahead and view the full log. And there are points in here where it's not clear that it's actually doing anything, except if you go back to close, you can see that there's still a spinning stick. And so it's not entirely clear when this is finished, but I would just go ahead and let this go on for a while. Eventually the stick will stop spinning, or maybe it won't, and you can go back to view full log, and that will give you some idea. It'll go beyond this point, and you'll get some idea of when it's probably over. So again, I'm going to pause the system here now and let it spin for a while, and we'll come back when it's time to do something. So at some point, if you've been watching the log, you'll see something to the effect that all upgrades are installed. So I'm going to close out the log now. Let me go ahead and put my cursor back in here. And we can view the full log. Now, it's going to ask you to reboot. So you're going to need to tab down to reboot, and then you're going to want to hit the reboot key. And it says remove the installation medium, then press enter. You don't actually have, for example, a CD to remove. So you can just go ahead and press enter at this point, and the system will reboot. And then we can log in to the new installed system. Now, what I found is that no matter how patient you are, it will sort of step all over your first login attempt, and it will start doing things even though it says you've logged in. So you can wait for it, or you can just start typing it. You can type over this, or you can press enter a couple of times and you'll get your login back. And you can log in with a username and password you set when you did the installation. So we'll go user1 and password, and that'll get us logged in. Now, at this point, we've got the system installed, but we don't have LAMP, and I'm going to run through just a few quick steps here to get LAMP installed. LAMP, again, is the web hosting environment that many people like to have installed on a basic system. And so the first thing to do is, although the system did a security update, it doesn't update everything that's here, and you'll notice that we are showing 57 packages can be updated. So we're first going to issue an update and upgrade command as follows. And that command is as follows. By the way, there's a link to some documentation that has these commands in it. I'll put that in the section below the video here. So you can go retrieve that document, and you'll have these and a bunch of other information as well too, other things you may want to do following the installation. And this will take a few seconds. I'll pause the documentation while it performs these steps. Okay, now once the update and upgrade process is finished, installing LAMP is really just a matter of two simple commands. The first is to install a program called Taskcell, and that's easily accomplished. Let me get my cursor here. Sudo apt install Taskcell, and then then sudo Taskcell install LAMP server, and that will install LAMP. And this will take a few seconds. I'll go ahead and pause the video while we're getting this going. All right, now our LAMP server is installed. The packages are installed. There's one more step that we probably need to take. As installed, MySQL Server is not secure. That there's no root password installed, and MySQL is not really configured. So there is an installation script you can run at this point, and I'll walk you through that. So start with sudo MySQL underscore secure underscore installation. The first thing it's going to ask is that it asks you whether or not you want to install a plugin to test passwords and improve security. So it checks the strength of passwords and allows the user to set only those passwords which are secure enough. And would you like to install that? For this installation, if you want to come up with an easy password for MySQL and the users that you're going to set up in MySQL, I'm going to recommend no, because that can become kind of a pain. In a live installation, you might want to install this, but I'm going to answer N for no. And then now is where you are going to set the password for MySQL, and I'm going to pick something simple. I'm just going to put MySQL. And then you have to re-enter that. Now, I'm going to recommend you go ahead and answer yes for all of the other prompts, because this will make MySQL more secure. And so we're going to remove anonymous users, disallow root login remotely. We're going to answer yes for that. Remove test database and access to it. We're going to answer yes to that. Reload privileges table now. We're going to answer yes to that. And that's all there is to resetting security. There's one other thing you're probably going to want to do, especially if you want to install programs like phpMyAdmin. The new default authentication is by a plugin called AuthSocket, and that causes problems when you try to install programs like phpMyAdmin. So you want to actually change MySQL to allow local password authentication for the root user. And you can look that up if that sounds a little bit confusing. It's a little bit obscure, but just trust me, if you want to install some other software that will need to allow the root user to authenticate by password, then you're going to need to do this. So I'm going to show you the command here and then show you what it changed. So here's the command, and let me type it in, and then I'll show you what it does. First of all, we need to enter MySQL. So and so now we're in MySQL. So here's the command. Alter user root at localhost identified with MySQL native password by MySQL. And that's just saying we want to change the authentication method from authsocket to a native password for the user root. And then we're going to give it the same password that we just gave it in our previous command. So let me execute that. And then we can verify that. Let me first issue this command, which actually makes that take effect now, which is flush privileges. And then let me execute another command that will show you the command that I just gave was actually executed. Okay, this is just a query that's going to show the authentication string for the users that are currently in the MySQL user table. And we can see that for the user root, the plugin is now MySQL native password. If we'd run this command before we executed our previous command, it would have shown the authsocket plugin rather than the MySQL native password. So now we can quit. And we can assure that we can use the local password to access the MySQL monitor for the user root by executing, by trying to enter MySQL with the -u. We can get into MySQL this way, which we couldn't have done before. And so enter the password. We're going to enter that password that I gave. The MySQL is the password that I gave. And since we can get into MySQL this way, we would not have been able to do that had I not gone through this process. And this makes MySQL behave the way it used to behave in 1604. So the things you used to be able to do in the previous LAMP setup that was the default with 1604, you can now do with 1804. So we can quit. And that pretty much ends the configuration and the purpose of this video, which was for you to be able to get 1804 set up on VMware Workstation or Fusion. It's the same. The configuration part's the same with either product. In basically the same way that you had it working with 1604, so that you can do the same kinds of things. So I hope this was helpful for you. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or problems. If you follow these instructions, it should be pretty foolproof. So go forth and have fun. Thank you.